In the summer of 1989, a rescue helicopter was sweeping the slopes of a mountain in northern Japan, searching for two missing hikers. And then the crew saw something below them that made no sense. Carved into a clearing, laid out in enormous letters made of birch trees, was a single word: SOS. The letters were huge, big enough to be read from the sky. Someone had cut down trees, dragged them into position, and arranged them into a distress signal that could only ever be seen from above. The helicopter crew did their job. They found the two missing hikers nearby, alive, and pulled them to safety. And then they asked the obvious question. The sign, was it yours? The hikers looked at them and said no. They had never seen it. They had never touched it. They had no idea it was there. So who was calling for help? To answer that, we have to go back 5 years earlier, to a quiet office in central Japan, and a young man named Kenji Iwamura. He was 25 years old, an office worker from Aichi Prefecture, reliable, unremarkable, the kind of person whose life leaves very few traces. He lived an ordinary routine: work, home, weekends. But he had one passion: the outdoors. In July of 1984, Iwamura took time off work. He told people around him he was heading north, to Hokkaido, Japan's wild northern island, to hike in the Daisetsuzan mountains, a vast national park, volcanic peaks, dense forest, and some of the most remote terrain in the country. The locals have a name for that region: the playground of the gods. It's beautiful. It's also enormous, bigger than some entire prefectures. And once you step off the marked trails, it can swallow a person completely. Iwamura traveled there alone. He was seen setting out toward the mountains, and then nothing. He didn't come home. He didn't return to work. At some point, a search was made, but Daisetsuzan is not a place that gives people back. No trace of him was found. The file went quiet. The seasons changed. 5 winters buried the mountain in snow, and 5 summers melted it again, and the world moved on. Until July 1989, until a helicopter, looking for 2 completely different people, flew over a clearing on the slopes of Mount Asahidake. Asahidake is the tallest mountain in Hokkaido, and on its lower slopes, in that clearing, stood the sign, 3 letters, SOS, built from birch trunks, not branches, trunks, whole young trees cut down and laid out in formation, each letter several meters tall. Think about what that actually requires. Someone had to fell those trees, strip them, drag them, one by one, into an open space, line them up precisely enough to be legible from an aircraft. This was not a moment of panic. This was hours of work. Maybe days. The rescued hikers denied making it, and investigators believed them. The 2 had only been lost a short time, and the sign was clearly older. The wood was weathered. It had been lying there through seasons. So a second search began, not for the living this time, for whoever had built it. They searched the forest around the sign, and piece by piece, they started finding things: human bones, scattered across the area, spread out, most likely by wild animals, over a long period of time. A skull, fragments, the kind of scene that tells you immediately, whoever this was, they had been here for years. And then, near the remains, searchers found something else, a backpack. Inside it were personal belongings, documents, including identification, and 2 cassette tapes, along with a tape recorder. The identification gave them a name: Kenji Iwamura, the office worker from Aichi, missing since 1984. After 5 years, the mountain had finally given him back. That should have been the end of the story. A tragic accident, finally explained. A family, finally given an answer. But then, investigators pressed play on the tapes. Most of what was on them was strange in its innocence. Music, recordings of anime theme songs, the kind a young man in the 80s might have taped off the television at home. But on one of the tapes in the middle of it was something else, a voice, a man's voice calling out. The recording was a distress call. In it, the voice cries for help, saying, in effect, SOS, help me. I'm on a cliff edge, and I can't move. Come and get me. The words repeat. The voice strains, as if shouting to be heard. And that recording changed everything about this case. Because think about what it means. Somewhere on that mountain, a man was trapped, by his own account, unable to move. And in that moment, he took out a tape recorder and recorded himself calling for rescue onto a cassette. A cassette that could not transmit, could not broadcast, could not reach anyone. A distress call that no one could ever hear. Why would anyone do that? And that wasn't even the biggest problem. The biggest problem was the sign itself. The voice on the tape says, I can't move. But the SOS was built from felled trees, cut, carried, and arranged. Heavy physical labor, sustained over hours. The kind of work an injured, immobilized man simply cannot do. So investigators were left with a contradiction that sat at the center of everything. If Iwamura built the sign, then when he built it, he could move. He could work. He was strong enough to cut down trees. But if he couldn't move, as the tape says, then who built it? And it gets stranger. Because to cut birch trunks, you need a tool, an axe, a saw, something. Searchers combed the site. No axe was ever reported found, no saw, nothing that could have felled those trees. The sign existed, the trees had been cut, and the thing that cut them was missing. Then came the forensics, and instead of closing the case, they cracked it open again. When the remains were first examined, the initial assessment reached a conclusion nobody expected. Based on the skeletal features, the examiner's first reading suggested the bones might belong to a woman. Sit with that for a second. The backpack said Kenji Iwamura. The tape carried a man's voice, and the first forensic reading said the body might be female. For a moment, the case split in two. Were there two people on that mountain? Had someone else died beside his belongings? Was the SOS built by one person? For another, police checked records for missing women in the region. The press speculated. The mystery deepened. But the confusion didn't last. Further examination and identification work concluded that the remains were, in fact, those of Kenji Iwamura. The initial reading is generally put down to the condition of the bones after 5 years of weather and scavenging animals. Skeletal sexing is not always clean, especially with incomplete remains. Officially, the body was his. Yet even with the identity settled, the questions that mattered most were still standing exactly where they'd been. The sign, the missing tool, and that voice on the tape. Calm enough, some listeners felt, to be unsettling. Not the raw panic you'd expect from a dying man on a cliff. Something more measured. Though we should be honest here. How a person should sound in their final days is something none of us can really judge. So what actually happened on Mount Asaidake? There is no official narrative that resolves every detail. What there are theories. Let's take them one at a time. Theory 1. Iwamura did everything himself. In this version, the timeline explains the contradiction. He becomes lost in 1984, but he isn't injured immediately. In those first days, while he still has strength, he builds the SOS, hoping a plane will spot it. No one comes. At some point after that, a fall, an injury, exhaustion, exposure, he ends up trapped and unable to move. And that's when he records the tape. Not as a real distress call, but as a message, a voice, left behind for whoever eventually finds him. Proof that he was here, that he fought. This is the explanation most investigators lean toward. Theory 2. Someone else built the sign. In this version, the SOS and the remains are two separate stories that happen to share a clearing. Someone else, another lost hiker at another time, built the letters and walked out alive, never reporting it. The problem? No one has ever come forward. No other missing person was tied to the site. and the odds of two desperate stories intersecting in the same remote clearing with only one body are hard to accept. Theory 3. The tape wasn't recorded on the mountain at all. Some have suggested the distress recording could have been made elsewhere, even rehearsed, and simply carried there. There is no evidence for this. It survives only because the recording feels wrong to people, and feels wrong is not proof of anything. And finally, the quietest theory, and maybe the darkest, that everything is exactly what it looks like, and the strangeness is just what dying alone actually looks like. A man signals, waits, weakens, and near the end does something irrational, because ration is a luxury of the safe. Every one of these theories explains something. Not one of them explains everything. There's one more detail, and it's the one I can't let go of. The SOS sign worked. That's the awful part. It wasn't a failure. It was seen from the air, exactly as intended, by exactly the kind of aircraft it was built for. The plan was good. The letters were legible. The clearing was right. It was seen. 5 years late. For 5 years, that signal lay in the open, on the slope of Hokkaido's tallest mountain, through snow, through thaw, through hiking seasons, silently asking for help on behalf of a man who was already gone. We don't know how long Kenji Iwamura survived out there. We don't know what happened between the moment he set out and the moment he pressed record. We don't know why the search that could have saved him passed him by. What we know is this. A 25-year-old office worker walked into the playground of the gods and did everything a lost man is supposed to do. He built the sign. He left his voice. He waited. And somewhere in those trees, in those final days, he made a recording no one would hear for 5 years, for people he would never meet. So here's the question that stays with me. When he pressed that record button, alone on the edge of a cliff, did he still believe someone was coming? Or did he already know he wasn't leaving that mountain and simply refuse to disappear without a trace? The tape has an answer. It's in his voice. We just don't know how to read it.